Over the last few weeks, I have done videos ranking the starting quarterbacks from each and every Power 4 conference, and we have one more to go. That is the Big 12. The Big 12 is actually quite interesting, as you have a couple guys who I think already are superstars, and then you also have guys who have a ton of potential. From top to bottom, the Big 12 is actually pretty good at the quarterback position, and today I'm going to attempt to rank them. It's going to be a fun video, and it's going to be controversial to some, but before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and rank every quarterback in the Big 12. At number 16, we have the starting quarterback for the BYU Cougars, Gary Bohannon. I guess technically he's in a quarterback battle at Retzlaff, but Bohannon's going to win the job. After coming out of the state of Arkansas and being a 4-star recruit, Gary Bohannon was seen as the future of Baylor football. He didn't play much in 2018 through 2020, but he'd take over as a starter in 2021, and they would end up having a resurgence. Bohannon would throw for 2,200 yards with 18 touchdowns, but then after the season was over, he lost the job to Blake Shapen and ended up transferring to USF, where he did pretty much nothing. He would then sit out an entire season before he would now transfer to BYU for his 7th year of eligibility. Honestly, I can't stand the players that hang around college football for nearly a decade, and there's really no reason to rank Bohannon any higher than 16th. He only had one good year out of 6 seasons, and I never thought he was all that impressive to begin with. He could completely prove me wrong though, but we'll just have to wait and see. For now, Bohannon is number 16. At number 15, we have TCU starting quarterback Josh Hoover. After his dad was a linebacker in the NFL, Hoover was just like his dad and ended up becoming a huge player. He ended up throwing for nearly 10,000 yards and 108 touchdowns in his prep career, and because of that, he became a 3-star recruit after going to Rockwall High School. He'd originally commit to Indiana, but would eventually flip to TCU. Hoover would redshirt and do nothing in 2022, and then in 2023, he'd actually start the final 6 games of the season. Hoover would end up throwing for 2,200 yards with 15 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. While he did struggle at first, he got hot towards the end of the year, having 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in a win over Baylor, and then 5 total touchdowns against Oklahoma. Josh Hoover showed a lot of potential, but he still is relatively new. At number 14, we have the quarterback battle going on at Arizona State between Sam Leavitt and Jeff Sims. Jeff Sims is now a journeyman quarterback after being a blue-chip recruit, but it looks like he is slowly falling behind, and it looks like it is Sam Leavitt's job. After going to West Lynn High School in Oregon, Leavitt became a pretty big recruit after throwing for a total of 82 touchdown passes in his high school career. He did end up being a 3-star, and after spending 1 year at Michigan State, he threw for 2 touchdowns and transferred to ASU. According to pretty much all sources, Sam Leavitt has pretty much unofficially won the starting job, and I'm actually excited to see what he can do. He seems to have that fire and it factor to him, but still, he's young, he's unproven, and that's why I have him at number 15. He could move up the list though and surprise some people. At number 13, we have Alan Bowman. Just like Gary Bohannon, Alan Bowman has pretty much been playing college football since he were in elementary school, as after being a 3-star recruit, he would start as a true freshman in 2018 for Texas Tech. He'd play there through the 2020 season before he'd eventually transfer to Michigan in 2021, where I believe he was actually a walk-on. I thought he ended up graduating and moving on from life and would transfer to Oklahoma State for the 2023 season, where he would win the job. While he did throw for 3,500 yards and 15 touchdowns, he also had an insane high 14 interceptions. Ollie Gordon was really the lifeblood of that offense, and honestly, I just don't really think Alan Bowman is all that good. To me, he's just an old game manager at best, and while some may complain at having him at number 13 on the list, I think he hasn't shown any reason to be ranked higher than that, as all the guys above him have had better stats or have way more potential. We'll have to wait and see though, as Oklahoma State has a lot of hype and Bowman does have a lot of experience. At number 12, I have Cincinnati starting quarterback Brendan Sorsby. What's interesting is him and Hoover actually have a connection, as after Hoover flipped from Indiana to TCU, Brendan Sorsby would commit to Indiana and take his spot. While Sorsby ended up redshirting in 2022, he'd become the backup in 2023 to Taven Jackson, but would eventually take over. He was a product of Lake Dallas High School and was just a 3-star recruit at the time. Sorsby would take over near the end of the season and ended up throwing for 1,600 yards with 15 touchdowns and 5 picks, and also ran for 300 yards and 4 scores on the ground. Keep in mind this was also a terrible Indiana team, and he really only started the last 6 games of the season. Sorsby put up good and efficient numbers, showed a lot of potential on both the ground and through the air, and became a 4-star transfer who has now gone to Cincinnati. He will take over for head coach Scott Satterfield, and I think he's actually a name to watch. At number 11, we have Baron Morton. Coming out of Eastland High School, Baron Morton was a huge deal. He ended up throwing for 3,700 yards and 37 touchdowns as a senior and had 19 more on the ground, and after 3 years of being a star there, became a 4-star recruit and committed to play for Texas Tech. Barron would end up redshirting in 2021 before playing a little bit in 2022. In 2023, he would take over as a starter, playing in 10 games, and he threw for 1,800 yards with 15 touchdowns and 4 more scores on the ground. Baron Morton was a great leader of the offense and showed a lot of potential through the air. Texas Tech is getting a decent amount of hype for 2024, and while he's not the best quarterback on the list, he's definitely not the worst. He's just your average starting quarterback in the Big 12. That's why I have him at number 11. At number 10, UCF will have a new starting quarterback and a familiar face in KJ Jefferson. After being a 4-star recruit out of the state of Mississippi, he would back up Felipe Franks in 2020 before taking over as a starter in 2021. He led Arkansas to a resurgence and ended up putting up big numbers and expanded on that in 2022 and could have gone off to the NFL. Unfortunately, he would come back in 2023 and ended up regressing in pretty much every area, and Arkansas was awful, so he decided to look for a fresh start. He'll transfer to Gus Malzahn's system at UCF, where he will likely be the day one starter, and we already know what we're going to get in KJ Jefferson. He's going to be an above-average player who has a high ceiling, who will hopefully have one more big season and try to make the NFL. We'll have to wait and see, but for now I have KJ Jefferson at number 10. At number 9, we have Donovan Smith. Donovan Smith is one of the more unknown names on this list, as while he came out of Friendship High School in Las Vegas, he low-key was going under the radar. He actually transferred away from Bishop Gorman, interestingly enough, and in his 1 year at Friendship, he threw for 3,100 yards and 25 touchdowns and had 13 more scores on the ground. He ended up being a pretty big recruit and chose to commit to Matt Wells. In 2020, he would not end up playing at all, before in 2021, he'd end up starting their final 4 games. He threw for 1,100 yards and had 10 total touchdowns, and then in 2022, he'd come back and start 4 games, once again throwing for 1,500 yards. In 2023, Smith would end up transferring to Houston, where last season he threw for 2,800 yards and 22 touchdowns, and also ran for 428 yards and 6 touchdowns. Houston is now under Willie Fritz, and Donovan Smith has a lot of experience, and is actually a name that I think could blow up, but for now, I have him ranked just around average, and I have him at number 9. At number 8, we have one of the most interesting names on the list, and that is Roco Beck. Coming out of West Chapel, Florida, Roco Beck kind of came out of nowhere. His dad was a first-round pick after playing at West Virginia, and he ended up being one of those late-rising recruits. He ended up becoming his high school's all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns, and decided to commit to Iowa State. After playing well in camps, he was rated a 4-star recruit by Rivals, but was pretty much a 3-star backup according to pretty much every other site. When Hunter Deckers would get in trouble for his gambling stuff, everyone expected their highly touted freshman J.J. Cole to play, but instead, Roco would end up playing. This past season, he threw for 3,100 yards with 23 touchdowns and 8 picks, and also had 3 more scores on the ground. Beck ended up leading them to a second-half resurgence, and actually is getting a considerable amount of hype for 2024. I think his best days are still ahead of him, but for now, I'm going to have him ranked at number 8. At number 7, we have the most highly touted transfer in the Big 12, and that is DeQuin Finn. Coming out of Martin Luther King High School in Detroit, he was the guy who was right before Dante Moore, and ended up putting up pretty big numbers while he was there. He was named Mr. Football for the state of Michigan in 2018 and threw for 1,900 yards with 24 touchdowns. He'd end up going to Toledo, where he'd play a backup role in 2019 and 2020 before he'd take over as the starter in 2021. He became a second-team All-MAC player in 2022, and then this past season became the most valuable player in the MAC. He ended up throwing for 2,600 yards with 22 touchdown passes and also had 500 rushing yards on the ground. He led Toledo to one of their best seasons in school history and finished his time with the Rockets with over 7,000 passing yards. For his last year of eligibility, he decided to enter the transfer portal and became a 4-star transfer who committed to Baylor. He'll take over for quarterback Blake Shapen, who left for Mississippi State, and DeQuin Finn is not only super athletic, but he has a ton of experience and will have a chip on his shoulder for his 1 year in the Power 5. I'm excited to see what Finn's going to do, and he's a guy who in my eyes is actually significantly going under the radar. At number 6, in my eyes, we have the most exciting quarterback in the Big 12. Yes, I know you might think I'm crazy for saying that, but honestly, Avery Johnson's potential is limitless. After going to Mays High School, he ended up becoming one of the best quarterbacks in Kansas high school football history, as he was not only the Gatorade Player of the Year, but also an Under Armour All-American and Elite 11 finalist. He put up insane numbers through the air and on the ground, and was also known for his extreme confidence and his long hair. He was one of the top quarterbacks in the class of 2023 and ended up starting 2 games for the Cats last year. Johnson would end up having his best performance against Texas Tech, as in that game, he threw for 77 yards, but ended up having 5 touchdowns on the ground. Avery Johnson looked a lot like Colin Klein in that game, and then he would start their bowl game against NC State, where he had nearly 300 combined yards and 3 total touchdowns. Avery Johnson is seen as the next big thing in college football in my eyes, and has a lot of Colin Klein in him. But will the coaching staff be able to properly develop him, and more importantly, will he crack under the pressure? People think that he could be the best quarterback since Colin Klein, and I hope that he doesn't get crippled. For now, though, I have him ranked as a number 6 quarterback in the Big 12, and some people are going to think that's controversial, but that's how good I think he could be this year. We are now, in my eyes, into the first tier of Big 12 quarterbacks, and those are the certified stars. At number 5, I have Jaylen Daniels. Coming out of high school, Daniels was completely overlooked as he became a 2-star recruit, and no one really thought anything of him. He ended up going to Kansas, where he was under head coach Les Miles, and in 2021, he had his big moment. He'd end up leading them to an overtime victory over the Texas Longhorns, in which he completed that crazy 2-point conversion pass and ended up burning his red shirt, but Daniels was great. In 2022, he ended up playing in 9 games for the Jayhawks and got off to an insane start. Unfortunately, he would get hurt midway through the year and would nurse an injury throughout the season, but ended up throwing for 2,000 yards with 18 touchdowns and then 425 yards and 7 more touchdowns. In 2023, he had some Heisman hype and was seen as a potential first-round NFL draft pick, but he would once again struggle with injury. He'd end up throwing for 705 yards and 5 total touchdowns, but he will be back in 2024, and for now, I think Daniels deserves to be near the top. Yes, he struggled with injuries, but his potential is all there. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but for now I have Jaylen Daniels at number 5, and he could move down. At number 4, we have Garrett Green from West Virginia. After becoming a 3-star recruit in high school, Garrett Green was always seen as an afterthought because he wasn't tall enough. Despite putting up big numbers while he was in high school, he'd end up following head coach Neil Brown as he recruited him while he was at Troy, and he would come to West Virginia. Green was seen as somewhat of an afterthought while he was on campus, as he didn't play in 2020 or 2021, and in 2022, he ended up having 1 good game. Going into 2023, everybody wanted Nico Markiel to be the starter, but Green would end up taking over and actually had a tremendous back half of the season. He ended up throwing for 2,400 yards with 16 touchdowns and ran for over 700 yards on the ground and 13 more scores. Garrett Green became a star by the end of the season, and now with Neil Brown as head coach, the Mountaineers have a significant amount of hype in 2024, and Green's one of those guys who probably won't be the number 1 overall pick in the draft who's going to win games. Don't be surprised if he upsets Penn State in week 1 and has a huge season. For now, though, I have him at number 4. At number 3, we have Shai Sanders. Maybe some people unjustly hate Sanders, but he was actually pretty dang good last year. Obviously, he's the son of Deion, and after spending some time at Jackson State, he transferred to Colorado to be the starter. Last season, he threw for 3,200 yards with 27 touchdowns and 3 picks, and some were giving him significant NFL hype. But he apparently wanted to be the number 1 overall pick, so he decided to come back and run it back with Coach Prime, and he's seen as one of the better quarterbacks in the country. He has ideal size, has a lot of confidence, and has a good arm. And with his stats last year, there's good reason to believe that Shai could be near the top of the Big 12 and near the top of college football, and can play his way into the top end of the draft. For now, though, I have him at number 3 because he didn't win that many games last year. He could go up, though. At number 2, some may think this is controversial, but I do have Cameron Rising. After becoming a 4-star recruit, Cam Rising would flip from Oklahoma to Texas and ended up being on the bench there. He would decide to transfer to Utah in 2020, where he wouldn't really play much. He'd take over by the end of the 2021 season, throwing for 2,500 yards and 26 total touchdowns, leading Utah to the Rose Bowl. In 2022, he would return, and this time threw for 3,000 yards with 26 touchdowns and 8 picks. And Rising had become a star, but unfortunately he was dealing with some sort of strange injury. While he was questionable for week 1, Rising would never play for the Utes in 2023, and now, as we go into 2024, he's on his final year of eligibility and has a lot to prove. Rising is one of the most established quarterbacks in college football, and was a star with both his arms and his legs, but we're going to have to see how he does. For now, I have him ranked at number 2, but he could end up falling to the bottom of the list. He may not be the same player after the injury, and just like Jaylen Daniels, this ranking is sort of based on his past and his pre-injured play. I'm not really sure where to grade Rising, but for now, he should be at the top, but he could end up falling, as I said. Finally, at number 1, some people might disagree with this take as well, but I have Noah Fifita from Arizona. Coming out of Servite High School, Fifita put up huge numbers. He was teammates with Teteroa McMillan, and he ended up throwing for 7,000 yards and 83 touchdowns in his time in high school. Despite being one of the top quarterbacks according to Max Preps, Fifita was only a 3-star recruit and was sort of seen as an afterthought in the class of 2022. He'd end up redshirting his first year on campus before last year being the backup to Jaden DeLaura. He'd end up taking over the back half of the season, and Fifita put on a show. He threw for 2,900 yards with 25 touchdowns, and Fifita led Arizona from the bottom of the Pac-12 to a huge bowl victory and 11 wins. He's playing his way into significant Heisman hype, and Fifita may be the best pure quarterback in the conference. In terms of his NFL potential, it's probably limited because he's not even 6 foot, but Fifita is going to be a college star, and Arizona has a significant amount of hype this year, and for now I have him at number 1. Honestly, going back through the list, I'd say the best 2 pure quarterbacks in the Big 12 are Shai Sanders and Noah Fifita, but Garrett Green's late resurgence makes him in the top 5, and both Jaylen Daniels and Cam Rising pre-injury were studs, so that's who I have rounding out the top 5. Still though, some may see it as controversial, and be sure to let me know what you think I got right and wrong. What is your personal rankings, who's your favorite quarterback, and what other topics should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.